for me is on the individual micro level, I can't blame any of them. They've all been set up to fail, to succeed, to break our hearts by the system that they live in. I can't fault Jake Dickert's decision. I can't fault Mateer's decision. In a vacuum, they all make sense, but they make sense because this is how they've been forced to decide what's best for them and who they love in their career.
Welcome back, or welcome to Why Option, your pseudo-holiday CFP preview edition. Jim Thornby, of course. I am Yogi Roth. Today, we've got a very special guest. Notre Dame's own, and the Rams' own, and the CW's own, and Max's own. It's JB Long, a man who does everything, but primarily he's a phenomenal husband, father, as well as been the voice of the LA Rams since 2016. He drops by to talk about South Bend, Indiana, also the state of Washington State, having called a couple Cougs games this year on the CW. With that said, Jim, last night, this week we're on a Thursday recording this. On Wednesday, I was at the LA Bowl with Gronk. Not a lot of people there for the old Cal UNLV game. No surprise when you look at the state of college football we're in now. But it was fun. Got to see a bunch of faces. Patrick Laird, Chad Hansen, some old school Cal Bears in the building watching their beloved team play. Bears lose to UNLV. But regardless, like, college football just continues to move. So I'm curious, post-Heisman, pre-CFP, how you feeling today?
Yeah, I actually did watch a good chunk of that game last night. And I think it's to this point from, this whole bowl season, outside of the playoff games, you have to take all of the other games with a grain of salt. Just enjoy that you're getting to watch some college football and, hopefully, because all of these teams are at different points. And I think last night is a great example of that. Both of these teams are going to look different next year. You had Dan Mullen in attendance because he'll be the new head coach at UNLV last night. But this was kind of the capper on their year. They got their first bowl win since 2000, which is awesome. They tied the school record, 11 wins. That's great. I think that's a really cool, positive momentum shift for UNLV as Coach Odom left. At the end, you kind of go, oh, but they brought in Dan Mullen, was obviously an established head coach. So I think that's a nice thing for UNLV fans to end that on a real positive note. Now, for Cal fans, I think obviously you're concerned about what happened, but maybe not for the right reasons. Like, obviously, Fernando didn't play. He is as the time of we're speaking of it right now, he is in the transfer portal. So obviously that's a concern. This is almost assuredly, I didn't see anything post-game, but I know in the preseason, Jay Knott said that this was going to be his final season there. So that's going to be the end of that. However, Cal is going to look completely different next year. Now, there's not a head coaching change, but on the offensive staff, they're bringing in Brian Harsin. They're bringing in Nick Rolovich, which just those two alone coming to the Berkeley is just kind of mind-bending, on a whole different level outside of football. But this is going to be a totally different look at this team. So last night, you're probably just, as a Cal fan, you're more looking at like, all right, who are the guys that are coming back next year and getting a sense of who they are, and not so much worried about what the final result of the game was last night.
Yeah. So here's my question for you, because I was at the game, didn't listen to the game, and not going to go back and watch it again. But I'm curious, as a broadcaster, and have JB Long on, who is a established professional broadcaster. What was the broadcast like, and what do you think we'll see in the majority of non-CFP broadcasts when there's tremendous turnover, whether it's staffing, key positions like quarterback, like we get the Holiday Bowl coming up, and John Mateer not going to be there. Jake Dickert, obviously, neither coordinator is going to be there. Kind of curious what you heard. Like, did they just call the game? Were they trying to tell stories about college football? Did they have opinions on the portal, the Fernando Mendoza saga, etc.?
Well, it's funny because to that note, like, you can really casually watch the game. Like, you're not breaking down what the announcers are saying is I mean, the ESPN had a great announce crew there with Shushan and Riddick, but like I'm not as heavily invested in. I need to listen to everything and worried about, because at the end of the day, the result is not really all that apparent. They had Dan Mullen come up in the booth. They had some fun with him about it, saying that they're going to charge ESPN an appearance for that one, but. Yeah, I think, but for the most part, I felt like when I was really the parts of the game that I was dialed in on, it was just really about the game.
Yeah, that's cool.
So it was an easy listen, because I'm just watching the game, going, "Oh, that guy looks pretty cool. Oh, there's an amazing fake punt that I've never seen before."
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. But like for the most part, I'm not watching it as as laser focused as I would be if this was a quote unquote regular season game.
So here's the part of, and I want to go down two roads with you here. When I watched the game, the part that was disheartening was I'm watching the game and I'm looking at Cal's quarterbacks and I'm saying, neither one of them are going to start for this team, at least in my opinion, next year. And you're watching two play, and usually in a bowl game, or if you see a backup quarterback in, I think we've all been trained in our football lives to be like, that's the future. Right, a guy signs out of high school or transfers in, you're like, that's the future. I think that was just a weird place to watch the game, to be like, meh, yeah, okay, didn't throw the ball well. I put the other guy in, like did okay. Like it's very much a, I don't want to be too harsh, but you kind of just like, whatever. You're just watching the game for the game. So I wonder what it's going to be like moving forward, because we do see a lot of transition. The other thing, to your point of the head coach, I think it's important to note this, because I think we live in worlds where it's like, oh yeah, like go get that head job. And you look at a guy like Dan Mullen, who had tremendous success in his career. You go back and you look at his run with Urban Meyer as an assistant. Then he goes to Mississippi State, does things that nobody's ever done there before in quite some time, at least in my history. And then he goes over to Florida. Okay, they struggle, but everybody's really struggled there since Urban Meyer had left that place. You could argue that for a bunch of different reasons. And then he goes and is killing it on TV. And then you're like, the UNLV job, right? Now, I UNLV is not a terrible job, but it's not like he left a huge Power 4 job and then was turning down other huge Power 4 jobs. Like, I think it's just a reminder of like how hard it is to get a head coaching job. And I think sometimes we all can get lost in that, because we track like the top 3 names as assistants, and of course they get jobs, but it is hard as heck. And I say that because I'm talking to assistants all season long, and specifically all late November, early December long, as they're prepping for an interview, as they're trying to get jobs. And I think people will be surprised the amount of assistants that don't get jobs, that interview or quietly interview with a search firm. And I think it's just important to note that, like, man, like for Dan Mullen to take the UNLV job, I think is a sign of like how hard it is to get a job, because clearly he wanted to get back into coaching.
Yeah, and maybe it could also, I mean, going down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole, or whatever you wanted to, like, maybe it's a sign of better things to come for UNLV. Like,
no doubt,
that could be like, oh, there might be more coming with UNLV in the future. Not to
think about better things to come for a lot of these schools. Like, let's just look at Washington State, which we'll get into here. Like, on one hand, you're like, Jake Dicker took the first best available job that was offered to him, right? He was rumored for a bunch of jobs, Purdue being one of them, gets offered the Wake job, takes it, and totally understand why you take it. And on one hand, you can go down the road of like, he had to take it, resources, the league, power conferences. I get all that. Like, it's a developmental program that the big schools are going to poach your players from. Like, look at what's happening now. That's very fair. That's a fair take. And then there's the other lane of like, the Dan Mullen to UNLV, like, hey, let me go to a place that can go win, that has a chance to go to the CFP. Look what Boise State's doing in the Mountain West. Look what's going to happen in the future of the Pac-12. And I think those are both fair and again, thoughtful conversations to have as the transfer portal is going nuts, and now the latest job opens up at Washington State.
Yeah, and it's funny because you look at like the online reaction, and we talk about this all the time about how the amount of vitriol, but like this is from like the local like media side of like that are fans of Washington State. So there's that vested interest in it, but they also have a media platform, and I mean they are out for blood with everything that happened here. And I remember us having a conversation. I forget who was on the show here, but we talked about Jake Dickert maybe 6 weeks ago, and talking about that it looked like he was probably going to be around again next year because all the jobs that were opening were lower division jobs, lower conference jobs. And there weren't those Power 4 jobs that were opening. And now those jobs have kind of, the Purdue one was the first one where I was like, oh, that could be a job where you could possibly see him leaving for that. Now, when you think about it, like Purdue, is not one of the most attractive jobs in the Big Ten. Just like Wake is not one of the most attractive jobs in the ACC. And with Washington State and with the way that the playoffs are currently structured, we'll see what happens in 26 once we've had a couple of years of this and they, whether they expand or change the format or what have you. But I would say as of right now, it's easier to get to the playoff as a Washington State school, as Washington State, than it would be those other schools. Now, Indiana is kind of proving that theory wrong to an extent. Arizona State to a bit of a lesser extent as well. But yeah. I understand and I don't understand, leaving for that job. Like, it's almost like he was, in a sense, because of the timing, heartbroken about John Mateer leaving.
Okay, so I've been saving my opinion for this show on this because a lot of Cougs have hit us up and have hit me up. As we've referenced many times, I'm an honorary Coug, right? I've done their postseason Cougar Athletic Fund event for almost a decade now. I'll do it again later in February. I love everything about Washington State. I love going to that community. The most challenging part for me of me going to the Big Ten was I didn't get to take my family to a game to Pullman because literally I wanted to take them to Palouse so badly. I love that community. I think it's a huge part, Jim, of my personality that is Pullman. But I think there's a thoughtful conversation to have around what just went down at Washington State, so let's have it. Let's go towards and let's rewind to the season. This team was on the brink of a historic season. This team was on the brink of making a real argument to the College Football Playoff Committee about getting a slot in. It was a real thing. Real thing. It wasn't pie in the sky. It wasn't just a narrative out of left field. It was legit. This team had a real program that returned. They had an offensive line. They had a front that had some talented players. They replaced guys in the secondary. They went to the NFL with other guys that I think had a chance to go to the NFL, and they had John Mateer. But you could argue top 5 quarterback in America. I would argue that. I don't even think it's an argument, to be quite honest with you. Now he's going to go to Oklahoma and away he goes. So we'll see that thing play out at his next stop. Cool. Here comes Jake Dickert, and here comes decision time. You know that you have an opportunity, and you will get other opportunities to become a head coach. I'm going to presume his head job is somewhere around the world of Wisconsin, right? And as we look at revisionist history, I want to comp him to Jedd Fisch, okay? Jedd Fisch was at Arizona, and everybody in the world was saying, Florida is the dream job. Florida is the dream job. Why don't you wait another year because it looks like there's some uncertainty in Gainesville. Well, he doesn't wait another year. He takes the UW job, and now he's cemented as the Huskies head coach. But what happens in Florida? They actually surprise some people. They get some wins. The job never opens up. So I do think there's a world for head coaches where they plan out. I'd love to have this job. Maybe this guy loses. Maybe, they're on thin ice. You could argue that about Luke Fickell in Wisconsin as they make another change to the coordinator position of this past offseason. But it's so hard to hang your hat on the uncertainty of another job in this profession. You almost have to live 6 inches in front of your face as a head coach. And I think that's a really hard thing at times to comprehend. Okay, so let's just lay that out. Second thing I think is important to note, Washington State, guys, this has been documented and well documented. The resources are not what they once were, right? So whether that's travel budget, whether that is recruiting budget, whether that is staff budget, there have had to be hard conversations there over the last year and a half due to the athletic department, due to the university, due to conference realignment. So if you're Jake Dickert, you have to evaluate what matters most to you. Do you want to operate at a full operating budget in your lens? Do you think that going to a place like Wake Forest gives you your best chance to be at your very best, to go win for a couple years and maybe go get a potential dream job? Or do you say, you know what? this job is really hard. I want to go get another huge contract and let me ride out my coaching career, because I think more coaches are going to be done earlier than we think. Like, all things that I think are really important to be thoughtful about. And then you spin it back to your point about people who have a platform in Pullman or in and around that community. You're saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. This community has thrown down fair. This fan base has thrown down pretty fair. Games weren't sold out all season long. It wasn't what it had been in the past, okay? That's all just fair points. NIL in the collective has stepped up. Totally fair. And it's an attractive job. Totally fair. I believe that Washington State's going to have a chance to be the premier team in the new look Pac-12. You look at them, Boise State, Oregon State, San Diego State, just based on their footprint, they're going to walk into that league with a leg up on everybody. So there's a world where you're like, hey, man, you can keep it going. And I think that it's important to have all of those conversations, Jim, because it's not as easy as, I can't believe he left us high and dry. No, he didn't. He also saved that place. Like, there was a world where he could have been a defensive coordinator in major college football making $2 million a year and dipped a year and a half ago. Like, Jake Dickert didn't do that. He threw down on the Cougs. I was there many times at night where he and his wife would donate $100,000, $100,000. Like, they were in on the Cougs all in. But I think it probably got to the point where it was like, this is going to be, if we're being realistic, a place where players get recruited and develop and probably get poached based on the rules that exist today in college football. So he went to another place that maybe they'll get recruited, developed, and poached within their own league. Very fair. But he probably, I would imagine, looked at Wake Forest and said, God, maybe it's a little bit, I don't want to say smoother of a ride, but you have more things around you that give you a better chance to have it as smooth of a ride versus being in the fight, as I think they've been in over the course of the last, really since he got the job. Like, you look at the COVID stuff with Rolo, you look at how he got the job, you look at conference realignment. I mean, they were always kind of backs against the wall. And Jake Dickert was the face of the league, let's be honest. And so I understand the passion. I understand the loss. I feel it too, Cougs. I thought Jake Dickert could have been there for a long time. But he left his mark. And I think the program will move forward. And again, I'll just finish with this, Jim. I've heard and talked to many candidates for this job that are thrilled for the opportunity to go there because they understand what we just laid out. You can go win. Now, it's going to be different. I don't think you're going to get a quarterback who's going to be there for 4 years if they ball out. Like, it's just, that is a reality now in college football. But that is okay. That is where we sit. Doesn't mean you still can't win. So there's my take on the Cougs.
Ready, set, dream cabin nestled in the woods. Just 4 hours to go. New job halfway across the country. Butterflies before a first date. Wherever you go, 76 fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
Yeah, and I think it's, it's symptomatic of the entire game right now. And I know you've said this many times. You talk about, the season ends and the clouds come in. And every school, I feel, gets that panic because so many kids are hitting the portal. So many coaches are changing. And everyone's looking at it from their perspective, which I completely get. But if you look at it from a total perspective, the majority of the schools are in the same boat.
No doubt.
Everyone, like, I can't believe our starting linebackers in the portal. I can't believe our starting wide receivers in the portal. Every other team is going through this same thing. Like, I think about Arizona 2 weeks ago, and as all the defensive starters started going in the portal and the panic, that set in around that. And then this week now, Noah Fafita says he's staying at Arizona. So now there's some positive news. You look at USC. You look at, we knew Miller Moss was going into the portal when he lost his starting job. But then you look at Kyron Hudson now going to Penn State. You look at Deuce Robinson, the Branch brothers, they're all in the portal. And it's like, oh, whatever. You look at, all these other teams and movement. And then I think if you step back and you look at Colorado, you look at Arizona State, you look at schools that had a similar, panic of where is our roster at and whatever like that. And then they were able to smartly, the portal just started. We're going to see where all of these guys wind up. And the smart teams will figure this out. And right now you might be going, well, then my coach is not one of those smart coaches. Give it time. Let's see. let's see where all these guys wind up, because there's a lot of talent out there. And who knows, you might wind up in a better spot with the incoming talent than you would have been if all those other guys would have stayed.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. So let's just put a bow on Jake Dicker to Wake Forest, because there's a world, and the Coug fans are not going to want to hear this, but the reigning coach of the year in pretty much every category is Curt Cignetti. He went JMU to Indiana. I called a bunch of their games this year. On defense, one starter came out of high school and went to Indiana. Everybody else was a transfer, and the majority came in this season. On defense. On offense, it was just the offensive lineman that came out of high school that ended up being starters. Everybody else was a transfer. Majority of them came from JMU. Elijah Surratt being one of them. You'll see him Friday night in the Notre Dame game that we'll preview here with JB Long here in a minute. I say all that of like, is there a world from Pullman to Wake Forest? I would do it. I've talked about all year long, if I'm an AD, I'm finding a coach at a quote-unquote lower level where he can bring his roster. Washington State is a Power 4 school, but they do not play in a Power 4 league this year. It's a league with 2 teams, folks. So I just be ready for that. I would do that. Now, we'll see what the players feel, right? We'll see what their collective at Wake Forest can do. So as we talk about the collective, you reference a bunch of names. Noah Stang. You look at Devin Dampier going to Utah. You look at Isaac Wilson
and
returning.
Dampier followed his coordinator. Utah hired New Mexico's offensive coordinator. Devin Dampier will go right around with him. So that is right to your point.
Yeah, there's package deals. There's a part of this reality. I also remember sitting in Kyle Whittingham's office years ago when the portal became a thing, and I said, Coach, if a player walked in and said he was leaving, would you ever be open to him returning? And he didn't flinch. He said, no chance. Oh, look what just happened, right? Like, and it happened last year. Like, and props to Kyle. I mean, all seriousness, like he has radically adjusted. Like people gave Nick Saban a ton of that credit. They should give that to Kyle Whittingham as well. He has radically adjusted to the times in college football. Please reference that. He referenced that. I think we wrote an article about him back in the day, in media days, when we spent some time with him about having to radically change and accept the new world order in college football. But what is my point? My point is that, like, don't be shocked when players go with coaches. Also, to your point about like the smart coaches, I've talked to a ton of GMs over the course of the last few weeks and explored that craft with tremendous detail. Most schools, and I think this will surprise a lot of people out there, most schools have a matrix. So imagine your matrix and you're saying, okay, let's just be general about it. And let's just say your NIL budget, let's just call it $10 million for the sake of argument, right? Some schools are 24, some are 20, some are 15, some are 4, some are 6. Let's just go with 10. And your matrix, you're saying our starting quarterback is at $2.5 million. Cool. That's just your matrix, right? So you're going to pay that for whomever is going to be your starting signal caller. Your split end, your leading receiver is $500,000, and your left tackle is $500,000. Let's just pretend those are real numbers. And in some places they are. And your above average player, whether that's Kyron Hudson, right, a wide receiver who's now at Penn State, who was at USC. It could be Jacob Manu from Arizona. We'll see what happens with him. It could be Fernando Mendoza. Who knows what's going to happen with him? I believe that's what's happening now is that, let's just say for my team, Team Yogi, I pay my QB $2.5 million. I pay my lead wide receiver $500,000. Well, Team Jim is like, well, we really need a quarterback and I really need a wideout. So I'm going to pay $3,900,000. So Jim values the same player at a different rate. Now, Jim might value a DB at $150K and I might value him at $250. So maybe that allows me to gain the DB, but I got to trade my receiver. So my point is that we are seeing, I believe, above average college football players, like we're talking day 3 NFL draft picks, who is great, go achieve your dream, but day 3 picks just basically being traded. And a lot of times the trade, not always, but the trade is a lot of things, right? There's development, there's fit, there's playing time. Of course, there's all those things. But mostly it can be attributed to, well, a school just values you at that position within their matrix at a higher number. Or their overall number is just higher than your team's overall number. And decisions have to be made. Lincoln Riley referenced it this week. Every coach has referenced it. And that is a hard truth and the truth. Because you can't just go out there and be like, screw it, I'm going to pay Jim Thornby whatever he wants to go get him. And then he's not going to have an offensive line. Like you just can't do that. And I think that's something that fan bases, you said the smarter ones, like it's even deeper than that. Yeah, it's way deeper than that. Like it's navigating your reality, right? So what can you afford? And then what do you believe is a premier position? And what do you believe is a game changer? I am, and I will go on record as saying, I don't think there's a ton of game wreckers that exist in college football. We all thought Bear Alexander would be that at USC. For whatever reason, he's been an above average player. He hasn't been a first round pick. I could say the same thing about a ton of players, especially on the defensive front or on the offensive line or in a bunch of positions, right? Sometimes you get surprised. Like, did you think Woody Marks would be one of the best backs in the Big Ten this year?
Right.
Probably not. Like, you knew he'd be good, but you didn't think he'd be USC's most draftable player alongside their center, Jonah Monheim, this coming offseason. But that's their reality. So I just think it's important, again, to be super thoughtful on, like, we're losing all of our players. We're not paying. No. Like, everybody's got money, especially at the power forward level, right? But it's how are you allocating it? And you cannot go into it frivolous. Those are not the smart teams. Those are the teams that are going to, yes, outbid for a certain player, but then be screwed everywhere else. And that is going to be the dance. And then finally, it's winning. Like, I hate to say it, man, but like, players now more than ever, again, just like I referenced about coaches have to live in the 6 inches in front of them. I believe when it comes to career choices, players have really struggle seeing a vision. Like, they are about right now. Why is that? Well, I'll give you one answer, one clue. It's this thing, because they're being told who they are, what they should be, how they should think right in front of their face right now. And it's a hard thing to navigate. And we are coming from empathy. I've talked to parents of players in the portal. It's hard. I've talked to agents of players in the portal. They're trying to lead and guide and navigate and maybe manipulate, maybe package deal it. But ultimately, they want their player to get paid. The parents have no clue how to navigate this thing. They want their sons to get paid. They also want their sons in great environments. Oftentimes, I think the players are forgetting what's right in front of them, or maybe what was right in the door they just left. And that's what I'll be curious to study. Do players come on back after dipping into the portal? Are they in 5 years? I don't think I want to write another book that's like 5-star QB, but maybe we will.
5-star transfer.
Yeah, 5-star transfer. Like, literally, Joey Roberts texted me this week. He's like, we need to get on that book. And I was like, you do not send that text ever again. Not right now in the CFP. But my point is, like, there's no blueprint to do
Maybe
it.
in April.
Yeah, and I know I'm long-winded on it, but it's hard. Like, I'll say this. I'll give Colorado a ton of credit. Like, we've all been hard on them, I think, as a collective football society. Getting Julian Lewis, and then we all thought, like, God, they're going to have a guy who reclassified be their starter. And then they go get Caton Salter from Liberty. Boss move. Great move. Got 1 year left with this dude who's really dynamic. We were with him at the Elite 11. Jim tweeted out a picture of him at the Elite 11. And then you get this other guy who's really talented. Let him sit for a minute, develop. Like, Dion, Coach Prime, like, that's a smart move, Jim, if you want to put that one up in air quotes. Like, really impressive. So we'll see how the thing shakes out. When the portal is over, we will assess it all. And then it'll come back again in April, and we'll reassess it again.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned Colorado. You know, another great pickup by them. They got the defensive tackle from Alabama, which kind of then also ties into, you know, you see Greg Byrne, the Alabama AD, former Arizona AD, out there talking about, the NIL situation, you know, and the online people are coming and being like, nobody wants to hear Alabama crying about money. Like,
yeah,
this
I do, though.
This is the program. I mean,
well,
yes.
Here's why. I love it, Jim. I don't mean to cut you off. I love that he came out and said that. Greg Byrne is as thoughtful as any AD. He's a visionary, I think, when it comes to college football. He'd be on the short list to be the commissioner of all things college football, which we'll talk to JB Long about here in a minute here, our guest here on today's Y Option episode. But when Alabama's talking that way, I think that they've got the type of juice to all of a sudden, do we set a salary cap? Do we set 2-year, multiple-year contracts? Do we set a version? I sat down with Patrick Laird and talked a bunch about this last night. He's, got released by Tampa Bay in May, but he spent a long time in the NFL. He's one of the smartest guys we've ever been around. We'll get him on the show here in the offseason. But talking about, like, do you do what they do in the NFL, which is like, I can match your offer, right? So then you make the offer public. Like, there's a lot of things that I think if Greg Byrne out of Tuscaloosa is saying, thank God, I hope whoever the hell it is, like, somebody's listening. And it might be the two commissioners of the SEC and the Big Ten who drive this thing, but set some parameters around the sport. So I wasn't one like laughing at them. And I know a lot online were like, oh my God, stop crying, you're Alabama. I was one being like, great. I'm glad you're talking that way, because it is out of whack. It is ridiculous that we're putting all this money into that. Like, and now I'll be the guy on my soapbox, but like, why don't we pay elementary school teachers a little bit more money? Like, I don't think the quarterback needs another $50,000. I think my fourth grade son's teacher does.
This household will appreciate that.
Yeah.
My wife is a kindergarten teacher. So, but it's funny because there was two news stories this week, or a week and a half that came out that I think kind of encapsulated the whole thing. First, Penn State's backup quarterback, and I put backup in air quotes as well because he plays a lot. He goes in the portal saying he needs to make the decision now, so he won't be with Penn State in the playoffs. Everybody and a lot of national media people that I thought I was kind of surprised by their reaction to this were like, the NCAA screwed this up, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, let's step back and think about this for a second. Can you hold what the NCAA did maybe 10 or 15 years ago against it? Sure, for sure. But I feel like at least in the last several years, they've been trying to build more guardrails into all of these systems. But what happens? They go to court and they lose. You look at Vandy's quarterback. He just sued and won to now his time at junior college doesn't count against his eligibility. So that's gonna put a whole new ripple on eligibility confirmed. And people are like, oh, well, you got to do this. I mean, I've seen the most ludicrous proposals of all time. It's like the schools need to change their academic calendars to fit the football schedule. Let's get real. That is not happening. But I remember just this past March, it was one of the most uncomfortable moments of my career. It was after the UCLA-Oregon basketball game, where N'Faly Dante just crushed, UCLA in the game. And I'm sitting next to Mick Cronin. And Mick Cronin in the presser, without being prompted on this, saying that N'Faly Dante should sue the NCAA to get more eligibility to play at Oregon as long as he wants, because the NCAA never wins a case. And the whole room was just dead silent. And I'm literally sitting right next to Mick Cronin, and I'm like, this is uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable. And then we moved on, especially because Dante is about to then come in the room to do his part of the presser. But the NCAA can do all that they want to do, but unless the system completely changes and we go to more of the employee thing, like, they have no power.
Yeah.
Because every time they try and put in a thing, someone sues and they lose.
It's an interesting word. You reference power. I think that college football this season's too long. I love the playoff, and maybe we'll be in Atlanta on January 20th, but it's just, I think it's too long. You reference academics. I do think that it's easy to light up academics until you go to a campus and call games, and you're like, they're in study hall right now, right? Like, they're working towards a degree. They're asking questions about the broadcasting degree, or, hey, how do I make a movie? Like those are all beautiful conversations that I've had every single week for the last 17, 18 years, broadcasting games in major college football. So I think that gets lost all of the time. You reference power. I think there's a world where conference commissioners, to a certain degree, enjoy, and they should. I'd enjoy it too if I was a commissioner, but there is a level of power that you have, and you also have to represent the 12, 14, 16, 18 schools. So let's just look at the SEC or the SEC. I hate the fact that they have 8 conference games, but they're like, I would imagine, yeah, sure, we'll play 9, but you're going to pay up. Like, there's the power, there's the business of that. And I just think that there's so many dynamics without a governing body at play that it'll be interesting, because on one hand, it's like Cal, Washington State, like, you can go through all the teams, Arizona, the teams that call it middle of college football this season, right? They'd love to see some reform. Big picture, is the game dwindling? No, the game is thriving. The game is thriving because there's more marquee games every relative weekend. The expanded college football playoff, right? You look at the video game numbers that came out. It's the greatest video game in the history of the world. Like, it's a really unique conversation that gets to the end, and it's like, what do you care about? I've referenced many times, like, what matters most? That's what I'd want to find out. because I don't know if it's like the holistic development of a student athlete around a football program, if that's what matters most. I just don't know. And that's going to be where eventually teams net out. Okay, so let's transition. What does matter most? Friday night, the CFP.
What's on the field?
Yeah, exactly. It's what's on the field. Indiana, Notre Dame. Saturday, we got SMU at Penn State. Clemson at Texas, Tennessee at Ohio State. I have formally petitioned my wife to give me Saturday all by myself. I have won that case. I am very excited. I cannot wait for Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific to kick this party off, man. So for you, your thoughts, and let's maybe get a thought per game, and then we'll eventually intro JB Long, get to our conversation.
Yeah, what I think is the coolest thing is I kind of did a little bit of research on each one of these games. And the fun part is there's not really a West Coast team in these games because they've all got the buys.
Hello. Do you claim SMU? I kind of claim SMU.
Quasi. But it's funny in that, like, how this game is giving us some unique matchups that it was kind of mind-blowing as I was kind of going through this. So, like, Indiana, Notre Dame, you got two schools that are in-state. This is the 30th time that those schools have played, but they haven't played since 1991. Like, so that's kind of interesting to me. In Indiana, they're 2-59 against top 10 teams since 1980. Now, Michael Penix, when he was at Indiana, they beat Penn State back in 2020 in the COVID year, and then before that, it was they beat Ohio State in Columbus in 1987. So, like, this would be a monumental win for Indiana, obviously, in there. And then you look at, SMU and Penn State. This is the third ever meeting between those schools. The last time was at Penn State in 1978. So it'll be interesting to see again, because I'm still not sold on Penn State. I don't know if the backup quarterback thing will be a big portion of what's going on here. But the one thing I was interested in, Penn State under James Franklin at home against top 25 teams, they're 8-9. And they've only beaten one top 15 team at home in that span, and that was in 2016 over Ohio State. Now, granted, that is each year is a different year, but for me, until they get over that hump, they're on that other side. So I don't know how that's going to turn out. Clemson and Texas is the first time they've ever met, which I thought was kind of mind blowing. Texas hasn't even faced an ACC school since 2002. Both of these teams lost to Georgia this year, and handily. So if you want to look at a common opponent there, that's kind of where to kind of judge off that. And then lastly, in that last game, Tennessee and Ohio State, it's the second time they've ever played each other. The first time was in the 96 Citrus Bowl. You had Eddie George on one side, Peyton Manning on the other side.
That's awesome.
So, I mean, like, those kind of things. And I actually kind of skipped over that. The SMU Penn State, actually, no, never mind. Sorry. But I think the key to that, this is the one where I'll get a little more analytical on. The key to that game will be, is Ohio State over losing to Michigan? Is that still in the back of their mind? And how do they stop Dylan Sampson, who is the SEC Offensive Player of the Year, second team All-American? He broke Tennessee's record for rushing yards in a season, rushing TDs in a season, or Ohio State is coming off their worst run defense game of the year. They allowed a season high 172 yards to Michigan. So how will that all factor in is what's going to be really interesting there to me.
Okay, quick follow-up, and we'll get to JB Long. Indiana, Notre Dame, I think Indiana wins the game. I think they do not get enough credit for who they are defensively. I think everybody can point the Ohio State game. That game was 7-0. They drop a punt, and they give up a punt return, and all of a sudden it's 21-0, and we're in the middle of the third quarter. I think they struggle with the noise. I was in Indiana a week and a half ago talking to Kurt Signetti and company. They struggle with the noise at Ohio State. I think that they are going to be tremendously they'll benefit from that experience tremendously. I think they'll be able to handle the noise. I think they go in there. I think it'll be a great game, but I think they are a more explosive offense. I get what Notre Dame is defensively. I think we got an epic clash going back and forth, but I will lean towards Curtis Rourke in this game, who he ended up getting a couple votes for the Heisman, didn't he? Was he somewhere in the top 10?
Yeah, he was in the top 10.
Yeah, so I'm going to Indiana in that game, and I think it'll be epic. I cannot watch. I will rewatch that game many times. SMU at Penn State. I'm in on Penn State. I think I wouldn't be shocked if we saw Penn State take a run here to the national title. I think Bo Prabula is a loss. I think Ty Warren is a monster. I think these two backs can get after it. I'm looking forward to watching SMU. I think there's something to these environments, these stages. We saw what happened early in the Clemson game. SMU comes roaring back. How do they navigate that going into this? This is a different beast. This stadium, I get that it's not going to be like a traditional whiteout. It's still going to be a whiteout. It's still going to be insanity in regards to that game. Not necessarily at night, which I'm sure Penn State fans would have enjoyed. But I love that game. I'm going Penn State. Clemson, Texas. I can't wait for this one. I just can't. Cade Klubnik going back home. This is a quarterback who grew up in the shadows of that stadium. We were with him this summer. Quinn Ewers grew up in the shadows of that stadium. They played each other in the state championship in high school football. They were both at the Elite 11 together back in the day. I think this will be awesome. I will lean towards Sark and their big game experience and their defensive front. I know they've lost a few players to the portal like everybody has. Like Clemson, I believe they took a player from the portal. So how about that?
Finally.
Finally. Yeah, I'm going Texas in this one. I just think the play calling of Steve Sarkisian is so unique. Pete Kwiatkowski, the defensive coordinator, formerly at Washington, now at Texas. Big fans of them. And also our good friend Kevin Carroll and Jared Blank on the staff at Texas. I'm going UT at home. And then finally, the other UT in Tennessee at Ohio State. I think to your point, the run game is accurate, but Tennessee offense is not built like Michigan's in terms of how they run the football. They've also got a dynamic quarterback. They got playmakers. I think this whole game is on the first quarter. I really think. I think Ohio State at home, I think that fan base will rally around their team. But if they go back-to-back 3-and-outs, I'm so curious about the psychology of this game and their home crowd. I was with a former player at Ohio State late last night who was a premier player there. I'm not going to give his name out. And I said, tell me about Ryan Day. What do you think? And he goes, man, he's amazing. He goes, but that fan base, like, they got to go win. And it was kind of like, what? Like, they got to go win or else or what? So I'd be really curious. And on record again, Ohio State fans, Ryan Day is phenomenal. I'm a huge fan. Did not play well. I get embarrassing loss to your rival. I get too tight in that game. Totally. I get it. I agree with you. But I do think that he is built to be the head coach there at Ohio State. If they can get this win, look out, because here we go with the Rose Bowl. I'll be there covering that one on New Year's Day. So there it is. I do want to finish with this because we're going to get asked a lot. Who should Washington State hire? I think there's a lot of candidates out there, again, that are interested in the job. Who are a few that I might call? I might call Andy Kotelnicki. Andy Kotelnicki is the offensive coordinator at Penn State. Andy Kotelnicki is a small school guy, much like, because he came up with Lance Leipold, right? You look at Kalen DeBoer, like there's a thing with guys that have had to mow the lawn and then call plays in the game. I think there's something there, okay? I'd also call Marcus Arroyo. Marcus Arroyo was a one-time head coaching at UNLV. His roster thrived. Granted, he got fired from there, took a year off. I was with him in his year off. He went all across the country, crisscrossing NFL to college, and look at what they have done at Arizona State with him calling plays. He's a finalist for the Broyles Award. I'd also call Brennan Carroll at Washington as the offensive line coach there, offensive coordinator. He's interviewed for other head coaching jobs in the past. This, to me, is a natural move for him. I think there's other current head coaches at other schools that I think will be fit. I know that there's a ton of inbound interest. Also, do you go to Jason Eck and say, hey, I know you just left, but you were just down the street at Idaho. Come on back to go to Pullman. I think it's a fair conversation. You go to Bronco Mendenhall and say, hey, I know you were just, at a place where we lost, a month and a half ago or so, whatever it was. Hey, what do you think? Like, I think there's a lot that's still at play there. So I do think Ann McCoy and company are in a really healthy place. There's a bunch of other names that I could reference that I think are really talented coaches. Cougs, you're going to be just fine. You're going to be just fine. Hang in. I'll see you late February. We'll be watching the game here in about a week or so, Jim, as they play in the Holiday Bowl. So I just want to kind of give a couple notes there at the end there, because I'm sure people are going to be asking, well, who might you recommend, Yogi? So there's a little bit of my list. All right, with that said, let's get to our big interview from today. It's JB Long. JB Long is, number one, a phenomenal human being, like literally one of the kindest people on planet Earth. We got to know each other at the Pac-12 networks. He has called games all across the country at every single level. Most notably right now, he is the voice of your Los Angeles Rams, who are thriving right now in the National Football League. We wanted to have him on because he's a graduate of Notre Dame. He's called games in South Bend. He understands the ethos of that place as we begin this inaugural year of a 12-team playoff, and then just reflect back on a season, calling games in the Pac-12, calling games in the Mountain West, and of course, calling games in the National Football League. And college football maybe is trending towards that. We'll hear from him in that regard. As always, our conversations are brought to you by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. So let's go and get to that interview with J.B. Long. As mentioned, here he is, folks, presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. He's always on the go, currently in the Rams facility. That's right, the play-by-play voice of your LA Rams, as well as many other places, including on the CW this past year and many more. It's JB Long. JB, dear friend of mine, happy holidays. Thank you for making time and making us a part of your holiday season, man.
Right back at you, buddy. Look what I got here.
Yeah.
Repping Y Option in Woodland Hills at the team facility. My favorite shirt.
So
good to be with you and Jim.
You're always such a champion, man, and just a dear friend. I can remember the first time we met. And I can remember my favorite meeting of us, and it was when you got this job. I think it's really cool to talk to people about like a moment of when they achieved something that they may have dreamt of, or maybe something actualized they put out into the universe. The day you felt as though you were going to become the voice of the Rams was when? And can you give your version of it, and then I'll give mine?
Sure. Well, I'm glad that that's the favorite visit I've ever paid to your house, and not the time that I showed up unexpectedly to a party that you were throwing the next night by myself with some cocktails in hand, just wondering where everybody else was, and you still brought me in and made me feel like I was invited. So I wasn't invited that time. I wasn't invited the day after my Rams interview in the summer of 2016, but you were strategically positioned between Beverly Hills, where the interview was, and LAX. And I remember stopping by and just kind of exhaling, unwinding, because I had poured into that like I had not poured into anything professionally. I felt like I shot my shot, and I probably was going to end up on the outside looking in. But I also felt like there was a chance that I might get that call on the other side of the weekend. And it was nice to just go through all that with you and unload. So thank you for always being receptive, and really for being there at many pivotal moments in my life and career.
Well, dude, okay, so my interpretation of it is I'm living in Venice Beach, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, can I stop over? And I'm like, yes, friends, let's do this, right? Like, JB rolls in and sits down on my couch, but has this, like, big folder with him. And I'm like, what you got? And I had no idea, like, you flew into LA for an interview, and you roll out the board that you built and shared with me that you had just interviewed with the LA Rams, who were just moving back to LA. We're seeking for who was going to be the voice of this franchise in this global city. And you're right, there was an exhale. And what I saw was what we all get to hear every weekend, or if you're lucky enough to be in the booth next to you, which I've been a handful of times in our careers, you get to see the insane amount of prep that you have. And to this day, my favorite photo of you was taken by your lovely wife, Cassie, on your way to the first Super Bowl that you called. And it was a photo of you on the team playing, working on your boards. And I'm just reminded of that all the time, of like, you define the lonely work. Like, you are willing to do the boring things longer, not longer than anybody else, just longer. And you pour into the craft in such a magnificent way, man. And you deserve praise on every front. And I know you get it. And finally, I think my favorite thing now as a dad here in LA is on Sunday afternoons driving around, because we crank you up, and my oldest son Zane's like, that's JB's voice. And we're really just fired up to be a part of the path, man. Keep kicking butt. I know the Rams are rolling right now, by the way. Keep it going too, brother.
Well, my favorite photo of you is the selfie that we take at the coffee shop that we go to, and we brought our wives, and we're trying to enjoy wine a little bit earlier in the day than we probably should have, and there's kids draped all over us. But my second favorite photo of you is very similar. It's you in the Coliseum this past spring. We did the last Pac-12 version of the USC spring game, and I remember telling you that one of your great attributes, Yogi, is being interruptible, something that I'm still working on personally and professionally. Because you're the same way. I mean, to go back to boards, ours couldn't be more dissimilar, and yet there's a lot of commonalities between them and the way that we pour into them. And what I love about that moment is you, more than anyone else I know, deserve to be uninterrupted in that space. In the Coliseum, that is your office those hours leading up to kickoff are yours. You've earned them, you deserve them, and they mean something to your product. And yet, that door is not closed, it's open. And so many people in and around college football in Los Angeles and USC want your time and wisdom, and you're so generous with it, even in those critical junctures when you should shut that door and focus on keeping the main thing. Other people are always the main thing for you. And man, if I could incrementally grow closer to where you are in that space, that'd be a lot better in a lot of the domains.
All right. Well, that just means that your family and mine are going to be hanging out over this Christmas break. So lock that in. Let's also talk about what you were locked in on this season. I think you just had such a unique job, as we all are in this unique year in college football of dramatic transition, right? Here we sit a day away from the inaugural expanded college football playoff. You, my friend, are a Notre Dame grad. Here comes Notre Dame hosting the first ever CFP game that's ever been hosted by anybody in South Bend, Indiana, against a school that is 198 miles away in Indiana, and the Hoosiers and everybody's coach of the year pretty much in Kurt Cignetti. So I think that's really unique. You also called games in what is now the new look Pac-12, as well as what will be a new look Mountain West. Like, can you put some context into your college football season and how you view the game in advance of the CFP with your alma mater?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. Let me start with the shifting college landscape, because there are a few moments this fall that were total mind warps. Like, I remember being in Fresno the week after the announcement was made that the Bulldogs are going to be part of the future of the Pac-12. And so I'm getting my tri-tip sandwich on a Friday night in Fresno, and I'm going to the stadium Saturday, and I see the Pac-12 logo up on the video board, and I'm trying to just conceptualize, where am I and what is going on here? Or another weekend, I'm doing an overtime thriller between San Jose State and Washington State in Pullman. Next day, I'm in Fort Collins doing a Colorado State game, again, a future Pac-12 member. And the next day I'm doing Rams and 49ers at SoFi Stadium in a dramatic comeback. And I speak from such a blessed place of privilege to have experienced all of those ways, but they come with real serious emotions and real conflicts internally in terms of where we are, where we're going, and being in that middle space right now that doesn't feel great. And so to land on where we are in this moment in time in college football, there's something that's so right about Friday night, December football at Notre Dame Stadium, right? And then there's something just totally disorienting about Indiana's in the college football playoff and Alabama isn't. Like, Boise State and Arizona State have buys in the college football playoff. Like, Yogi, you were right there alongside me last year. We were in early on the Cam Scadaboo train, man. Like, Kenny Dillingham, I did back-to-back games for Arizona State last year where they were so depleted. They lost to a not great Utah team in Salt Lake City. We were scared for their physical safety. They were having their tight end at the time warm up to take snaps at quarterback. That's where they were as a program. The next week, Kenny Dillingham rolls out the swinging gate at the Rose Bowl and beats the Bruins. And now look at them. It's unbelievable how fast the pendulum can swing in the state of modern college football. And there's still the undergirding that is so great, and that we absolutely love this sport. And I'm so happy that I feel like being at a 12-team playoff is where we should have been long ago. It feels right in this moment. But at the same time, what about everything else that's going on, Monday to Friday, that's really unsavory and I don't think is sustainable. And I'm concerned about it. I think the light is blinking red.
Okay, so let's just put a bow on the CFP. As a guy who, I don't want to butcher this story, but my interpretation is that one day you got a speaker in your class and he goes by the name of Ted Robinson, and you look at him and you say, yeah, I want to be like you one day. Ted goes to Notre Dame. You go to Notre Dame. Now Notre Dame is as back as they have ever been, right? After what might, a surprising is probably the kindest way to put that, surprising loss early in the season in Northern Illinois at home. I got to call a Notre Dame game last year. I got to be around Marcus Freeman, members of his program. I grew up, I'll admit, a Notre Dame fan until Urban Meyer and Notre Dame turned me down, Bob Davie, Ronnie Rodimer. You chose him over me. I'm still not okay with it. But the Fighting Irish find themselves in the playoff. What do you think we will see in that matchup against an in-state foe?
Man, I'd be foolish to predict it, but the hair on my neck will be standing up for sure to see what Freeman and Leonard and so many others have done. And look, I find Notre Dame easier to root for in this season of Irish football. As much as I appreciate what Brian Kelly did there, they would not be in this position competing for national championships without Brian Kelly. I had a hard time getting on board with some of his tenure and some of just what that was. Not now. This is much easier. And there's still so much just tradition dripping across South Bend, like the fact that they're taking finals this week, the fact that there was like a social media rumor that they might have black uniforms for the first college football playoff game in South Bend. No, it's blue and gold, baby. But yet they've come a long ways. Like that's no longer a natural grass surface that they grow to knee high to try and slow down Reggie Bush anymore, right? Like that is a cathedral of college football, but it's a modern one. And there's going to be nameplates on the back of those jerseys. Like they've come a long way, Notre Dame has, and yet they're still steeped in tradition in a way that I still think is healthy and beautiful and ultimately is hopefully an anchor point for the entire sport. Like think about how long they've resisted all the overtures to do this, to do that, to join this, to become a part of that. I think I've said in my text thread with my Notre Dame friends, I think having resisted all that, the only place they need to land in the end game is if we get to this new Division I tier where they play for the sport at the highest level, both in terms of the prize and the compensation and all the stakes.
Okay, so I've played in that stadium. I've coached in that stadium. You referenced the Reggie Bush game. I was there for the Bush push. Can you paint a picture for those on the West Coast that have yet to be to what some coin a mecca within college football? Yeah. What do you think that will be like in the first ever playoff game at night, to your earlier point, in December?
Real quick, where do you remember being? Like, what's your
first memory? Probably is in high school. I drove across the country with my dad on a recruiting visit and kind of hit all the stops. So from like Penn State to Pitt to every MAC school, and landed there. And I think it's a formative memory in my youth of, I don't think my parents, who grew up in this tiny town, they didn't know a ton about college football. I think they always thought Notre Dame was like far-fetched. Mm-hmm. And in the Notre Dame camp, I mean, I'll give myself a little bit of a pub here, but I played as probably well as I ever had in that type of setting. And I remember driving home and my dad being like, dude, you can play at this level. Mm-hmm. And then when they chose Ronnie Rodimer, who was 6'4", like 215 in high school, and here I was, I probably wrote 6 foot and 195, and I was more like 5'11", 180. When they chose him, I literally made my college decision on who was going to go play Notre Dame. I was so driven to prove them that they were wrong. So I just recall that moment. And then the first time I ran out of that tunnel and played and stood, I think my first snap was on like kickoff return. And I was like the center front line guy for whatever reason. And JB, I remember looking around being like, holy like you did it, like it's here, and then boom, the ball happened. Like you had to play. But it was a moment for me as a player. We played there multiple times. I definitely didn't have like my proudest moments probably in that stadium as we lost, and I let the emotions of the game get to me. I can remember having choice words for Bob Davie on the way into the tunnel, being like, you chose the wrong guy. And he was like, who is this dude? I asked him about it years later because he became a colleague at the Pac-12 networks back in the day. And he just chuckled and, had a good time with it. But those are the first couple, and then coaching in there, we never lost. So that was always a good time, but it is different. And I think we need to say that, like, it is a different experience. Like a sold out Coliseum is a different experience. You could argue every stadium is a different experience, but I think there's something about, whether it's because you saw Rudy in that clap, like whatever it was, there's something about that place. So I just took all the time. But you go. Tell me what you think.
I mean, first of all, I love your Rudy Roth story way better than the original Rudy. Like that to me gave me chills in a way that the movie has only been able to way back in the day. I also have to cop the fact that I probably did not have some of my proudest moments or finest performance inside Notre Dame Stadium, be it on the air in my early radio days or probably inebriated as a student, also saying foul things to Bob Davie, who was the coach when I arrived for my freshman year. I kid you not, when I pull up to my freshman dorm, Keogh Hall, there was a big white bed sheet hanging out the third story front window saying literally fire Bob Davie. And in my time at Notre Dame, I had, one season of Bob, a quick moment of O'Leary in that resume scandal, all of Tyrone Willingham, and then a semester of Charlie Weiss on my way out. So they were not great years of Notre Dame football, and yet it was a path that I probably resisted for much of my life because so much of my family, including both my parents, went there, and I wanted to blaze my own trail. But going there as a high school senior and staying in the dorms and going to a game, having been to like a Michigan Notre Dame game, it got to the point where it's like, who am I kidding? Like, this is the exact adrenaline rush that I want every single Saturday, because unlike you, I couldn't play it. And it's been a long time since I've been back, especially as a fan. But that Bush push is one I'll never forget. I was about halfway down the student section, ready to storm the field, only to have, my heart ripped out. And then all these years later to work so many times for USC, and to kind of be on the other side of that rivalry has been a real treat.
Wow. Okay, I'll tell you a quick story. Did I ever tell you about how I broke a TV in the press box?
In the Notre Dame press box?
So I'm sitting in that booth, right? And it's me, Lane Kiffin to my left, and Rocky Seto to my right, both like legendary coaches in their own right, in totally different lanes. Rocky is no longer coaching. He's a pastor in Pasadena. And here's Lane, of course, thriving at Ole Miss. So to that point, we call Y option. Oh my God, this is like so perfect that I'm telling this story. So we literally call Y option, which is a big part of why we even named this. As I was ideating with a colleague friend named Ken Black, we were talking about like our favorite play ever in college football. So we call 61 Y option, and it's a tight end option route to Dominique Byrd. If you remember Dominique Byrd, he was a huge recruit out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, ended up playing the NFL for a little bit. It's 4th and 9. We call that, and we tell Matt Leinart from Lane to Sark to Matt, because we take a timeout, and there's this shot of Matt of like this steely-eyed, like rock star that Matt Leinart was in college football. And we say, hey, if we give this certain look, check. And he was going like this. It was check to 82 stay, check 82 stay, which meant the tight end was going to stay in and protect. So you max protection, slide, and we were going to run slant and go to Dwayne Jarrett, hitch on the backside, a seam down the middle, a little check down to Reggie. And he goes, 82 stay, 82 stay. And we're sitting up there like, we got it. Dwayne runs a slant and go right in front of probably JB Long in the student section. And he catches it, fingertips. As he's catching it, we're like, go. Because like there's a world where like you score. Like you ran by the guy. And I just lose my you know what. I mean, you are distraught, or you're screaming stop as a student, and we are screaming go. And now back in the day, you have these papers that you write like for personnel grouping, play, front, coverage, and then like you'd peel it off, and there'd be like 3 layers. One layer would go to Lane, one layer would go to the offensive line guy, one layer would stay with me, and away you'd go. And that's kind of how it was. Like so old school, like zero technique. You weren't even allowed to have a computer up there at the time. And I jump up. So let's just call it. Let's pretend there was 60 some plays. So this is play 62. I jump up. Every piece of paper goes everywhere. I go like this with my fist, and there's this tiny little like old school TV that like your parents and my parents had back in the day.
Like this deep, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like hanging off the wall. And I jump like that. I'm like, hell, let's go. And I break the TV. The TV falls. My hand is destroyed, but it didn't matter. Like the adrenaline was so high. And then he gets tackled. And it's like, calm down, calm down, calm down. And you have to immediately settle in. And I'm trying to find the paper, and Lane's trying to call a play. And Brennan Carroll like runs way outside the coach's box to call a timeout. Like should have been like so many things were crazy in that scenario. But eventually we calm down. Then we run an option route to Reggie. Then we sneak it in, and there's the game. But yeah, man, that's and sorry, South Bend.
No, it's
comms,
fine. It's
team.
Iconic. It's iconic. And do you ever think about like we got to the point where we're wondering like, should that play be legal? Was that legal? Does that need to be an infraction? And now we're living in, and now we're living in the tush push era where like at the professional level, it's become like an unstoppable force. And I'm still dealing with it in my football life as an opponent against the Philadelphia Eagles. So,
well, I think what was so cool about that is that it was so organic.
Was.
I'll just say this, and I'm going to hope Texas doesn't do this anymore because Sark's still calling plays there. But I think it's been told enough where like you'd give the spike sign, right? Like you'd go spike, spike, spike. And that would mean to the quarterback, spike it. But for us, if we gave a point and spike, spike, spike meant like sneak it. So we were like, and Pete Carroll, as you know, because you've called so many games with him, and we've had him on this show, aggressive in nature, especially when games on the line. Like he wants the ball, he's going to shoot the jump shot at the corner, and away you go. And it was the same deal with us. And it was spike, but point. So Matt, you keep it. Well, Matt, as everybody probably knows, and I know Notre Dame fans know, but Matt turns to Reggie, and Reggie's like, yo, let's do this. And that was basically it. So it was never like, hey, this is how we practice a Bush push. It was just like, yo, I'm going to help you get into the end zone. And there's Matt with that spin that we all know, and away he goes. So I think I loved that so much more than anything else. Like I even loved that more than watching Charlie think that he just took down SC because Notre Dame was rolling, only to have to eat it. Like I love that on so many levels, right? There was an NFL thing with him and Pete. Like there were so many layers to beating Notre Dame. And then of course the season, which SC, we ended up going undefeated, eventually lost in the title game. But that was such a moment. And there's just so many stories. But I think that's to the point of like Notre Dame game. I think as a player, you remember every snap against Notre Dame. Like it just does mean a little bit. It's a little bit different than I think every other game for the majority of teams in college football.
I remember going through this with you too. The last Notre Dame game that I did, basically Thanksgiving weekend, what would that have been? Fall of 2004, on the roof of a rainy Coliseum. Like in my time, including that game right after I graduated, USC just gave it to us, right? Like that was just, you had to grin and bear it. But I remember having like one of those big black hefty trash bags over our huge radio set, just on the roof, being like, this is it. This has been fun. This has been an amazing hobby. I can't believe that I'm going to, call my last game in Los Angeles, Notre Dame, USC. And then, fast forward to the story that we started with, the Rams were in the temporary facility, which was the LA Memorial Coliseum, until SoFi Stadium was built. And so I remember almost being brought to tears our first preseason game against the Dallas Cowboys in that 16 season, nerves up to here, but thinking, I can't believe I'm about to put another radio headset on at this, hallowed hall of football. Man, it's funny how life bends back on itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's something like that. Like Jim Thornby was the producer and co-founder of Y Option. We were just in New York City, and the season's a grind, as you know. And there's always these, I think, moments that like we have to force on ourselves to be like, hey, how lucky are we? Like to your point, like the 22-year-old JB Long in 2004 calling a game at the Collie. If you said, hey, in 2016, you're going to be the voice of the Rams in this very stadium against America's team, if you will, in the Dallas Cowboys, you'd be like, holy, what? Like, really? Yes. Okay. Whatever it takes. And I just think that's amazing because it is a long season. So let's go to that. The season's beautiful. I think that this college football season, whether you were calling games on Max, or whether you were calling games on the CW, or you were calling games on Big Ten Network or Fox or the radio, wherever you're calling games, it's a beautiful season. And then I feel just like last year, the season ends and here comes this cloud across the sport. You called a lot of Washington State games. We both have been around Jake Dickert a ton. I'm curious your thoughts as Jake Dickert now becomes the head coach at Wake Forest, and seemingly like I didn't do the math, but it feels like it was like within the same 24-hour day where John Mateer is thinking maybe he's going to stay. Then he ends up going to Oklahoma. And then hours later, it seems like Jake Dickert takes the job at Wake Forest. And oh, by the way, he fired his defensive coordinator. His offensive coordinator is now at Oklahoma. I'm curious your take on the whole thing, having called a bunch of Washington State games this season.
I mean, I think the easiest place to start is college football needs a commissioner. I think you should be that czar. I think Jim Thornby should be at your side. We've talked about this over many lattes because it is an insane backdrop for the best time of year, what should be the best time of year for the sport. Try and imagine week 18 wrapping up in the NFL, and between the final Sunday of the NFL and wild card weekend, free agency opens. So instead of talking about the playoff games that matter most, you're having coaches getting hired and fired, and you're trying to figure out like where, you name it, like everybody's a free agent. Like, where's Tua Tagovailoa going to be next year? Like, who wants Aaron Rodgers at age 42? Like, this is all happening while we should be focusing on the games that we've been building to all season. and celebrating those stories and the people who have got there. Except, Yogi, I think it's even worse because in the NFL, there's a hard salary cap. Everybody plays by the same rules. So it might be more like you get to the end of the Major League Baseball regular season, okay? And you get to that playoff, and all of a sudden the Yankees are trying to raid the Oakland Athletics, right? Like Shohei Ohtani and everybody else, they're on one-year deals. So like they're playing out the most meaningful series of the entire season, all while other entities are coming in to try and shake up the entire landscape. But to answer your question about Mateer or Dickert, here's the hard part for me is on the individual micro level, I can't blame any of them. They've all been set up to fail, to succeed, to break our hearts by the system that they live in. I can't fault Jake Dickert's decision. I can't fault Mateer's decision. In a vacuum, they all make sense, but they make sense because this is how they've been forced to decide what's best for them and who they love in their career. And so until we align the incentive structure properly and until we put some guardrails back on it that I think will be healthy for all parties involved, there's going to be this murky December feeling that's going to be hard to shake as we all watch these games that I know we're all excited to see this weekend.
What's your thought on school and college? Like going to actual, you referenced finals in Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is a world of like, are the semesters driving the calendar? And there's another world of like, are we really talking about semesters? Like where do you net at having gone to Notre Dame and have a prestigious degree?
It's a great question, especially because those calendars don't align either. Like we do games, especially in September all the time where students aren't even in school yet. Right. So there is no student section for meaningful home games in college football. Where I went to school, I didn't even want to go abroad for a semester in the fall for fear of missing a single home college football game. Like that's where my roots and that's where my heart is centered. So to think about not being on campus for a playoff game because it's a winter break, I can't reconcile that. So I don't know what that final solution is. I don't know how you separate and cleave academics from athletics, but that's because I've been dyed in the wool for 40 years of a student athlete model, right? So I don't know how to rupture that and survive on the other side. I still think it's important at its core, at its nature, because it's the school that drives the loyalty and engenders the fan base, right? So unless we just want a total mercenary model, which I get it, we're very close. I don't know how you can not go to class with the athletes and still care about them in a way that I did for my peers and classmates at Notre Dame and still identify with.
Yeah, there's a world where like you're creating a lot of pessimism around college athletics. And what I talk to quarterbacks about, I'm going to speak at the Elite 11 Academy as the game ends. So I'm going to have it on Friday, and then I'm going to go over to Miracosta High School this weekend, and it's going to be a bunch of junior high kids. And one of the big things I'm going to remind them is that in college athletics, college football, you're a ranking. Go to whatever site you want. That's always kind of been the case, even from, I think I was part of the first ever rankings in recruiting back in the year 2000, 99, 2000. And now you are also a transaction, excuse me, and you're also a dollar sign. And I think that there's a real world where like we have to compete to take the helmets off, even as broadcasters, where we could be like, God, another, like this whole team is full of transfers like in 1 year. But there's this world, it's like you've got to compete if you're about the story and about illuminating these young athletes. Like you got to compete to do it versus didn't play well. Man, that guy was $6 million a touchdown. Or, you know, I think somebody told me about like a Tyreek Hill, like how much money he's getting paid and what his production is. You could argue the same thing with Jaden Ott at Cal, right? How much money did he get to return in NIL and what did he do this past season at Cal? Just wrapped up their season earlier this week in their bowl game. And I don't think that's a healthy way to go, but I think it's where it's going. So I want to hear your thoughts on like, you live in the NFL, right? Like you meet with Sean McVay in the very studio you're sitting in every single week throughout the season for the most part. Do you see the other comparisons? Or are you like, no way, to your point of like no schedule? Like this is almost reckless with where we sit right now in college football because it feels reckless to me, JB.
I agree that it's reckless. And I wish we could fast forward a couple of years and get the new data point of Belichick at North Carolina and get a sense of just how much those worlds can merge and what that looks like. Is it effective? Is it combustible? Is it irreconcilable? That would be a really informative piece to the puzzle for me to know. I Here's what I don't want college football to become. It's always been this way in a regard. I don't want to be naive to the fact, but I don't want there to be minor league divisions of college football. There's always been high major power conferences. There's always been, the rich getting richer. But like I did a game in Albuquerque this year, and to see like Dan Pierce's talent at quarterback, it was breathtaking. It was like, this guy in this league is a force. He's a problem. He's really going to impact winning. And I think it was October, and in the backdrop of the conversation, we're saying, but he's not going to be here next year. Like the corollary is, I wonder how much he's going to get to go to a bigger school next year. And that's not good for anyone. I mean, it's good for his pocketbook, but like that's not good for the sport. And the TV ratings may be great, and the sport, like the video game did gangbusters this year, right? Like there's clearly the appetite is still there, but I don't want that to lead us to reckless places, because it can all crumble really quickly if there's no bond between audience and coach and student athlete. Like that can all erode really quickly.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll find apathy among fans. I think, to your point, like it's never been popular, and working in the Big Ten, like you feel the juice that league has.
Mm-hmm.
And as I looked across the college football landscape, I wonder, like, where else is there juice? Like, what is that like? Like, let's just talk about Washington State for a minute. There's a world where I'd be curious your thoughts, like clearer path to the playoff, Wake Forest, Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
More resources, Wake Forest, Washington State. It's such a nuanced conversation.
I have two other ways of looking at this. One, if there is a silver lining, it's the ultimate sample size of only one season. But I would not have guessed that the teams that are in the 12 right now would have been largely those teams. Like, if the rich are stealing from the poor, then explain to me how some of these teams are not just in the field, but sitting there with top 4 seeds or buys or whatever. Like that still gives me some hope and some optimism. And here's the other thing too, Yogi, because you look at this from a player development and a personal development lens. I think we're eroding the foundation of the sport when you look at it from an NFL lens, like post-pandemic super senior. Like, what type of players are we going to get stepping into the NFL draft if they've bounced from school to school to school in 3 or 4 years? That means that they're getting these short little windows of development, and they're not teaching depth of scheme. They're teaching spring ball to September, and quarterbacks are jumping from coordinator and coach to coordinator and coach, and maybe learning bits and pieces of various systems, but they're not saturating in that knowledge to prepare themselves for a professional career, those at the highest end of the sport. So I think there's all sorts of far-reaching ramifications that this year-to-year model that we're living in has not really come home to roost yet. I think we need to get beyond the 5th and the 6th-year seniors and get deeper into the NIL transfer portal era before we really get a sense of all the consequences of what we've wrought.
So how attractive to you do you think the Washington State job is in the landscape of this new league, and what is seemingly going to be a relatively automatic berth if the winner has a 1 or 2 loss season coming out of the new look Pac-12 in a year and a half?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate what Ann McCoy said there, that there's a lot of inbound interest, and I think there should be, because that's a proven place where you can win, and it's a really difficult place to go if you're an opponent. And even though they didn't win out in these material sweepstakes, there was some backing to make that happen, and to make sure that he was taken care of, and that you do have a quarterback on the Palouse who can impact winning at the highest level. And you look at their quarterback room from last season, 2 seasons ago, and you realize, like, that's real. That's real. So I would like to think it's an appealing job, but it's also a very specific job. And whether, going back in time, it was Dickert, who I think brought a unique personality and a feel to that seat, whether it was the late, great Mike Leach and what he did on the Palouse, like, it's an appealing job. It's a job where if you do it correctly, you can have great success, but it's not for everyone. And you know that too.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I've talked to a bunch of coaches that want the job since the news broke, or even in anticipation of it. We knew Jake Dicker was going to be a hot coach, and was. There's a lot of schools and ADs across the country that had called me throughout the season to be like, "Hey, what's he like? Let me learn more." So no surprise that he got offered one of these bigger jobs from a Power Four league. I think I was probably a little surprised. I don't know if surprised, but I hated the fact of the timing just for the players. Like, you got a bowl game, you're playing in the Holiday Bowl. It's a really cool bowl game and experience, but you're also, that's the world we're in. He's got to go save a roster that might be depleted as well with the loss of their coach who had such success for a long period of time. So it's one of those, like, break up, get married, and never want to recommend that to anybody. Right? But that's really where we sit today in college football. All right, before we cut you loose, I do want to ask another question about the Rams. Like, pregame, I know you enjoy. You go down there. I think all of us fans enjoy, because you referenced the Pac-12 and Teresa Gould as a commissioner. I believe you interviewed her at Fresno in that game you referenced earlier, when all of a sudden Fresno was a part of the Pac-12, and it was this breaking news, and it was a huge deal. Her husband, Ron Gould, is running back coach for the LA Rams, and he rocks like the biggest logo on a T-shirt you could imagine. In his, I'd imagine, a pregame workout in advance of NFL games. What has it been like to see life in college football through his lens this season?
Well, I mean, all these people are connected to their college programs, and I would hate to see that not eliminated, but reduced in any way, because whether it's trading jerseys with a college teammate, or someone who mentored you, or someone who was your position coach in college, like Ron was, like, college rivalries are still the fabric of relationships in the National Football League. And I think pregame is where you see that a lot of times, because a lot of these young men haven't seen their teammates or their quarterback or their position coach since they've been in these different places in different cities, and they really look forward to these reunions. So pregame is a special time for football, right? Because the hay is in the barn, so to speak. It's the best time often to speak to coaches, because they're comfortable and confident with what they've got on their plate, and they can exhale, and they're just out there burning calories and nervous energy and watching Sunday Ticket before they get the chance to kick it off.
That's awesome, man. I love those photos that we get to see circulating online. Finally, this show is all about college football through the lens of the West Coast. You referenced earlier the buys that Arizona State have and Oregon has, Boise State. Curious, in the NFL, the lens that you believe that is seen around college football on the West Coast, now that we've seen the Pac-12 dramatically shift, conference realignment be a huge part of the inaugural CFP season.
Well, first of all, I got to cop to something here. I never thought that in the first year joining the Big Ten, the Oregon Ducks would be able to do what they did, right? Like, I thought making the Big Ten championship would be an immense accomplishment, as they all wrapped their minds around the challenge of the travel and the competition and the new venues and the bigger road crowds. All praise and all compliments to the Oregon Ducks. Go win the whole thing. Like, go get Phil Knight that championship that he's been after his entire life. And I know you have some special touch points there, Dylan Gabriel and so many others, Dan Lanning. Good on you. And good on representing West Coast football under whatever umbrella that takes, right? Like, from the prep level, the youth football level, all the way through the college ranks. It's been nice to see. I think of this as a 2-year resurgence in reputation for the West Coast, right? The final year of the Pac-12 as we knew it, and all the great things that Washington and the other programs accomplished. And then to show that it wasn't just a one-hit wonder, that this is still a place where you can have sustained success in lots of different programs. And I hope that the Arizona States and the Oregons and the Boise States of the world make that hold up in the context of this playoff, because I think they have every reason to believe that they can hang, they can compete, because they've already proven it for 12 or 13 Saturdays.
I love it. Can you imagine Arizona State and Oregon battling in a playoff game? I mean, just be absolute bonkers. Thanks for the time, JB. I know we kept you a little long, but loved having you on. Your insight, your expertise, the time. I think young broadcasters will love this listen. The Domers, I know you're fired up for Friday night. And overall, JB, great. Just congratulations on a season. Keep it going. Go get yourself another ring, man, okay?
Yogi, go get yourself another vacation. I know how hard you've worked and how much you've poured in every single day of this college football season. Jim, great to be reconnected with you as well. Admire what you guys put together. proud to be a associate member of Y Option in the show.
I love it. JB Long, voice of the Rams, and many others. Thanks for the time. It's the Afterglow. That was JB Long, presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. Jim Thornby, Yogi Roth here. Jim, when you think back to that episode and that conversation you just heard from our friend JB, I'm curious what came to mind. Do you have anything that we left on the bone that you wish you asked JB?
Well, the good thing is we'll have them back at some point. So the stuff that is on the bone, we'll bring back. But it was cool. Like, I love the Notre Dame origin stories for you both there, kind of sharing stories on there. And as I told the both of you when that interview was over, like, I love that after all these years of knowing each other, you're still telling stories to each other that you hadn't heard. That, and just that unique style in there. And the funny thing is, like, I've known JB. Well, I actually haven't known JB as long as I've actually produced shows that he's been on.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, like, when I was working at MLB Network, I produced an afternoon show called The Rundown, and we would have correspondents from all different ballparks and stuff like that. And our correspondent for the Tampa Bay Rays, who was JB Long back in the day, and but we had never actually interacted. Like, I would put together stuff, I would send it through our assignment desk and whatever like that. So fast forward to coming to the Pac-12 Network, where we're getting to launch it. And Kristen Bredis has all the talent come in for a big meeting down at the Grand Canyon conference room down there. And all the talent is in there. And I see JB. And I was like, oh, wow. And again, like, we had never met, never had any actual, crossover with each other. But as soon as the meeting was over, I went up and introduced myself. And I'm like, good to be working with you again. And it was just like, he's like, what? He's like, oh, I go, you were on my show all the time the last 2 years, blah, 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 blah. So it was just funny how that all kind of came together. And now here we are still doing this all together. So even though now we're all in different places. So yeah, again, it's just, it's, if you don't think that this is a small industry, like, it really is, because, this person and that person know this person. I mean, my boss at that time was Tony Petitti, who is now the commissioner of the Big Ten. So, like, it's just how random how all this kind of fits together.
Yeah, it really is. The longer we go and the older we get, the more connections you not only build, but you see come to the surface. You're like, oh man, like Andy Staples, what's up? Bruce Feldman, JB Long. And away you go. And you're lucky, like we've been, to be able to work with a couple of them more intimately than just kind of working on the same sport and covering the sport that we all love. A couple takeaways from me. One is, if you're watching it on Pac-12 Insider, or if you're watching it on YouTube, you saw JB Long rocking a Y Option t-shirt, folks. Get your gear, just like Jim has that hat, yoption.com, while it lasts. Go get yourself some swag if you want for the holidays. That was pretty cool. I think second thing, I loved how he talked about his time as a young broadcaster. I think for the young broadcasters and those aspiring that listen to this, JB Long, guys like he and Rhett Lewis, Guy Haberman, Ashley, like, they're just great episodes to listen to about getting into the craft. Mike Yam, think of our inaugural episode when we talked with both Mike and Ashley. And then I think finally what I want to ask him more about is the value picks in the NFL. Because we talked a little bit on the front end of our episode around the matrix that front offices have in college football now, around the portal and NIL and how players are getting paid. And we've got revenue sharing presumably coming up for this coming season. He's lived that. Like, he's lived franchise tags. He's lived multiple year contracts. He's lived value picks and ones that you may place too much value on. So I want to talk to him about that, maybe in the spring as we get into spring football and, of course, the draft, just because he's got so much more expertise and experience really in that than we do, as we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants here to a certain degree, as NIL is in a totally different world. And it's really in the one that we all thought was going to come, right? It really is now pay for play, and nobody's hiding from that. And they shouldn't. And I think it's great. All the freedoms in the world for college football players are awesome. I think it's maybe a little too much. I think there's no guardrails, which is allowing the sport to become what we've referenced, a little bit of but a black, dark cloud over it. And I think it's forcing players and coaches to do things that maybe we never thought that they might have done a couple of years ago. So there it is. That's JB Long. We got the playoff coming up. You heard our picks, and you heard my picks in that regard. We'll see what happens with Washington State as the weekend commences. But most importantly, enjoy the games. Enjoy Friday night, a home game in South Bend. Enjoy Saturday. Take your day off I'm taking a day. Hit us up on social media. Let me know your thoughts. I'll try to respond as efficiently as possible as we have a glorious day of college football. We'll be back on Sunday recapping those games and quickly previewing the next round of playoff games as we are officially in Christmas week and Hanukkah week and all the good things. All right. There it is, Jim. Lots of love. That was JB Long. Peace.